Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a suggestion from listener Richie, who sent me about 5 or 6 suggestions that I think I'm probably going to make every single one of them. But 2 of them go together. One of the subjects would be sovereignty, and the other one's free will. I think we could push both of these together because I think one fuels the other. What's interesting is when I was growing up and waking up eventually in my 30s and 40s, I never used the word sovereignty. Obviously, I'd heard it my entire life since I started studying history as a kid, just in school. When you hear a word like that, it's got this regal sound to it, and you're like, what the hell does that mean? Oh, it's a person's right to essentially be left alone, right? You have a sovereign space. Sovereignty, we need to acknowledge it has a physical element. It really has a mental element as well, The Inquisition invaded the sovereignty of people's minds in Europe. You must believe. Any time, I've said this in the past, but any time history requires laws for you to believe a particular thing in history, it's most likely a lie. At some point in there, it's a bold-faced lie. And that's why they get nervous and they create these invasions within the mental space to make you believe something. The Inquisition was the same exact thing. In fact, the Inquisition was that on steroids, right? Not only is there a law that you must believe, but if we can get you to say anything counter to that, well, then there's punishment, potentially up to death. What frustrates the elite of the world is that anyone would dare teach a human being about sovereignty because they know they can teach us the antithesis of sovereignty, serfdom, slavery. And what's interesting is mankind seems to have the ability to understand free will as the contrasting force against sovereignty without anyone teaching us this. As much as we get really pissed off at the little kid that has to hoard all the toys away from the other kid, in the mind of that child, even though it's disproportionately growing like a virus, they see the world as their domain and no one's to mess with it. You're always visiting their world, no matter if you're on the other side of the planet. And that's why we have to mature, right? Anytime you take a kid or a person and you constrain them in any way, shape, or form, they typically fight back to a point. And then they'll give up. But in the back of their brain, they're only giving up temporarily. And that's interesting. Now, what is fascinating to me is the people that really believe that whoever created us, let's just come down one step from God and go with like an alien visitation, Prometheus sort of idea. The folks that believe that the Anunnaki came and made us a slave race to mine gold out of the ground, they don't understand that we are designed to be absolutely not slaves, because we always seem to find our free will. It's a natural sort of pendulum inside our system that says anything against this is not what we want. And once you gain the bud, the seed of free will, right, you then start to figure out that you're going to need a domain to operate in. And this is typically where you have to come up with another word that is your ability to have your own space within common law, meaning no one comes into your space. And that's where we say sovereign, in my mind. Now, with all concepts like this, you have a concept that's psychological on an individual level. I feel like this backyard is my sovereign ground, right? And then you have a sociological implication, which is a society. And societies come in all these kind of Russian doll sizes, right? Little tiny towns, and then it gets into bigger towns and cities, and then whatever. Counties, states, nations, continents, all that stuff. Now, on a psychological level, it's a lot more fundamental and easy to define, even though each one of our definitions of sovereignty, which is essentially what we have come down to thinking that we need. It's like Steve Martin in The Jerk. He just needed his remote control. We all have our own definition. But when it comes to a sociological level, well, that's where we struggle. Now, maybe if you're the father of a very healthy family, you and your wife get along in terms of what you need. The kids follow your lead because they're kind of stuck in a sub-microcosm within the sovereignty that is the home that you have built, that you pay for and protect. Your kids are just in there. They don't really have a perception of the outside world or any need for such a thing until they hit their teens, right? But the more people you try to put into the definition of sovereignty, you're going to need a mechanism, a mental technology, like I said in the previous episode, that allows you all to get on the same page. Every time I think about a tribalistic sort of existence, my mind approaches the problem by going back in time to some sort of cottage that is, or I should say village, that is surrounded by a barrier. Kind of like the stuff you see in Game of Thrones. It's an old fortress, right? Made of spiky pieces of wood. Now imagine you have managed to pull a bunch of people together, say 50 to 100 people. You build one of these little fortresses. You got your folks all divided up in terms of who does what. You have the folks that take care of the population, maybe a horde of women, the boys, and the men. They all get out there and train how to use whatever weapons you can come up with. And then sort of in the middle, you've got some leadership. Some folks that are older, wiser. They've seen disasters and successes in other fortresses, and you just sort of come together, like I kind of pitched in my politics episode, although a lot less complex. And the thing is once you get together and put together all those rules about how society is going to function where you are, just this tiny little microcosm, right? I mean, do you realize a fortress could be an acre of land back in the day? Not that much, but very important and very powerful. But you got the one hippie who thinks that whoever walks by the outside, if they say they need help, there's no such thing as a lie, and we'll bring them in and take care of them. No vetting process, just look into their sorrowful eyes, and then you're in the door. And then the wise legion soldier that fought for Rome and whatever, he's seen the weight that people lie to get in, the Trojan horse techniques. He's like, no way, man. This is all just getting us to open the front door, and his buddies are just inside the woods there, and we'll never get the door shut in time, and he'll be inside, etc., etc. Well, that weird little physical analogy is sort of how we have to perceive, I believe, the mental technology that's being installed in us, the philosophies and the dogma and the indoctrination to get us to let go of sovereignty. But here's the tease. And there's kind of a two-sided thing to this. You have a bunch of people that are actually sweet people who want to believe the world can be a utopia with very little effort. And for whatever reason, they don't really study history. They don't study other geographical areas. They're monolingual. And so their perception of the outside world is nil. It's like the hippie in our fortress who just, they're being very empathetic. They're being played by a facial expression. And maybe the person outside is genuine, and maybe the person outside is a shill, is a Trojan horse, a deception. But imagine we take a little step further. The hippie gets denied by the Legion, the commander, right? Looking over the edge, and now comes something very vicious, a mountain lion, whatever, and that person can't escape. They're begging for help. They get knocked down by the animal or whatever, the person, and the hippie's looking, and the hippie's totally horrified that they could have let them in, and we didn't let them in, and look what happened in its place. A once-in-a-million thing happened right in front of everyone. Then the credibility between this hippie and this seasoned soldier that said, no way we're letting this guy in. You have no idea where he comes from, what he's all about. They start to have a clash about the definition of sovereignty and the policies by which you could invite someone into your sovereign space and share that whole experience. Then there's the other half. The guy is the Trojan horse. You let him inside as soon as you open the door, a horde comes screaming in here and takes over the village and kills everybody. And the hippie just happens to be the last one that's murdered, so he gets to see everything. And just before the knife goes into his throat, he thinks, holy shit, I was naive. We see this all the time in different scenarios in the world. And the one thing that really plays with the mind of folks that are trying to say, can't we all get along? And, hey, I'll just give you every piece of bread on my table. We'll just make it a big socialistic party. The problem is that conceptually in your mind, as infinitely complex as the process would have to be, it's actually fairly simple to see a utopia in your mind. You just watch old episodes of Buck Rogers back in the 70s, the remake. You watch some Star Trek, and you start to realize that there are mechanisms to get rid of money. There are mechanisms to preserve purpose in individuals. There are mechanisms to control population. All within a balance that everyone can get along with. But we seem to be incapable of actually achieving anything like it, which is really, really sad, right? I've said on this show several times, and I'll say it again, the proof that the elite of the world are some of the most ignorant human beings on planet Earth is that here they are trying to get their way. I mean, from the Koch brothers in the United States who are just trying to do regional things all the way up to the huge banking families of Europe. Their biggest problem is that they want to make you suffer. At the same exact time, they want to manipulate you into their will. And so, chronologically speaking, they are interrupting our ability to trust them. In fact, they are not only untrusted, but once you get screwed by these individuals and you lose an opportunity in life, you forever hate them. You forever track them in your mind. Whatever they touch is bad. So if they try to bring in a proxy, we find that the proxy works for George Soros. Now that guy or girl is just scarlet lettered in our mind for the rest of reality. And without a massive active repentance and sort of a hobbling of their power structure, we'll never trust them ever again. But if these folks were to create a very pleasant state in world economy, in world health, they could get their way because more people would trust them than have ever trusted them in the past to say, well, look, the economy's doing great. I never thought I'd be able to own a house, and now not only did I buy a house, but I actually paid for it. My kids are going off to great colleges. The roads are paved. Terrorism is a thing of the past. Sure, I'll give you my guns, right? Sure, you can take over education. Sure, everything can be robots that can be robots. Hell, police can be robots. Yeah, sure, you can fly these helicopters over my house that are drone-driven. Everything is great. Right? So they never seem to attempt that process. Not that I want them to figure it out, but what's interesting about the concept of sovereignty at this point is that we have a Renaissance 2.0 that I keep talking about, which is the awakening of mankind. I mean, it is a phenomenal, rapid, burning explosion of lucidity in our world right now. And for me, the kind of the subtotal, the daily subtotal, the millisecond subtotal to this awakening is free will. And the very next thing you can say to put it in another paradigm is sovereign. Is sovereignty. That once you figure out your free will, you then want to establish a domain by which you can operate your free will, and that's sovereignty. That space is what we call it. But it's not just a physical space, it's a mental space as well. For those of you who feel religiously prosecuted, you want religious sovereignty. For those of you who are, financially repressed or racially oppressed, you want to have sovereignty in each element, each attribute of your life that you feel like you don't have a fair share of your ability to express your free will, right? So the first thing that happened to me personally was just the absolute understanding of the basic concepts of sovereignty and the fact that our forefathers and everyone who wrote Magna Carta and everyone who's ever taken care of a decent society, all the Greek philosophers that wrote about it, they were trying to figure out sort of where the limits are. I don't personally need to have the entire world at my disposal. I'm willing to share the world with everyone else in the world, and I'm willing to follow policies when I change geographical locations. Just tell me up front what I'm going to be dealing with, and I'll make the decision of whether I'm coming or not. If you fly to Saudi Arabia, you sign this piece of paper that says you violate these laws, you will most likely be killed. So don't fuck around, right? So you might look at that piece of paper while you're still in the States and go, yeah, I like red meat and alcohol enough that I probably shouldn't go over there. But we wake up on an individual level and everything is small, which is good because you need a core. And you need to see at the center of sort of the brain trust of the whole thing. And then you can expand out. And then you start to think about other people's sovereignty. And that's a weird thing. As an American, we're built on sovereignty. We're built on free will. We have, 2 amendments in our Constitution, the freedom of speech and the right to bear arms, which is the second protects the first. And so it's built into us, if you understand the words that are written on paper, that this is sort of our duty to our country, to ourselves, to our communities, that if we ever see it being taken away in a different community within the borders of the United States of America, every citizen is supposed to rise up and reinstate the law of the land, the Constitution, based on Magna Carta, in that area. And anyone who was caught trying to take away those rights goes to jail, gets tried, and perhaps gets hung for treason. And so we grew up with this our whole lives, And then when we look over the pond at different countries and realize that folks have given up all of these rights, whether or not they realize it or not, it's really confusing. Us looking at Europe giving up all of their gun rights, it's astonishing that that a human being would utter sort of subcognitive dissonance statement, which is, we're going to maintain free will and give up our guns. These two balance each other out because there's always a king, there's always a banker that doesn't like the fact that you have the right and ability, maybe you have the ability and the right to defend yourselves if they want your stuff, if they want your land, if they want your people. Nowadays, they want your children, right? They want your children on 2 different levels. The most common level is they want to educate your child. First, they want to rip your child away from you by creating such a dual income household requirement that the mother can't stay at home, so it rips the child out of your hands. Then they want to stick them inside some indoctrination pool to basically pre-configure your child to pass all the laws that they want passed, to get rid of things and rights, right? To infect free will. And then the other group just simply comes and picks up your kid, and you'll never see them again. But now here's the other rub. I think most of us who have at least reached 40 and gotten well past 40, you realize that managing your own life is pretty much the maximum apex of your capabilities. It's tough. If you have a situation where you can make your life very static, meaning, you just have the same routines every day and you're very pleased with those routines, you eat the same meal on Mondays, the kids are perhaps an autopilot, they're driving themselves to school now, perhaps they're out to college, etc. Maybe you can find some solace in that. But I think today's generation is a little more dynamic. I think that life changes. I think people have dreams. I think now through the internet, you're able to listen to people who've had their dreams and realize there's no special sauce, there's no special bloodline. You can be just as amazing as anyone. And that's sort of, if you want to know the secret that celebrities understand or successful people understand, is that they're on the other side going, God, I worked my ass off and now I'm here. Now I'm standing on the pitcher's mound of the Yankees or whatever. I'm standing on stage playing to 50,000 people, screaming our lyrics that I just wrote last week, And they realize, they know that they're special, but only because they made the decision inside their mind to persist. And as a minor digression on that point, when you push really, really hard and you achieve success, only you know that you may have spent 10 calories or 100 calories worth of energy to succeed, and the success brought you back maybe 75 calories worth of reward. But to the outside world, oh my gosh, you're a millionaire, and boy, can I borrow a couple bucks? And you're kind of thinking, well, I worked so incredibly hard for this 75 cents. I spent $1 worth of my money and my time and my spirit and my soul to get 75 cents, and now you want to take part of that money away. And then you look at society and you have these conversations with the average Joe the plumber, great guy down the street, and you realize, he might flippantly say, well, you're rich, or you have it easy, or something like that, some insinuation that you have it easy, and in the back of your head you're just saying, nah, I don't have it easy. I don't have the life you have. Joe the plumber is getting the ideal life, the wife, the kids, the pool in the back, just go to work, make the money, come home, pay the bills. There's never any threat of losing your job. And even though he's not a rock star or whatever, he's actually got one of the best lives anyone could ever have. Period. He wins. Meanwhile, you get to go to, special exotic locations, you get to meet really famous people, but in the end, you're by yourself. If you have someone with you, because they're off on their dynamic tangent. So you share a little bit of time during the day, right? But back to my point. We struggle at some point with just controlling our worlds, right? It's tough. It's tough to create a life that's fulfilling and, not too complex, or not so complex that you can't manage it easily, right? So it's this wild balance, and it changes as you get older and older and older. But now, the reason why I mention that is that we don't think about running sovereign constructs that are way bigger than us half the time. Now, what would be some of those ideas? Well, let's say you join the city council, or a council that runs a giant organization. You could be on the council of a local college. College campuses have 4,000 kids, if not 20,000 kids running around, right? Right away, you're saddled with all of the politics. He said, she said, complaints and charges and all kinds of stuff. It's really phenomenal, the kind of stuff. You have employees who try to sexually assault each other. I mean, it's crazy. And that's just a tiny little campus. If you go up to a true city council, well, you have all kinds of policies that shape and mold the town that you're a part of creating. Then you go up to the state level, and it gets insane. It depends on if you're a state of Rhode Island or the state of California. Completely different monster, right? Then you go to a nation. A nation that has enemies abroad. There's the silent enemy that may be trying to smuggle a bunch of their citizens into your country to rob your welfare systems and mail the money back home, to crazy nutbags in North Korea who are sitting there playing with Tonka toys, pretending like they actually have, real construction vehicles. So how is the average man supposed to participate in the sovereign formulas of bigger thinking? The one interesting thing that, strikes me as being an American is that the forefathers here had it all thought out before they participated in the Declaration of Independence, and then finally the Constitution. Of course, they borrowed from Magna Carta, which really created a shortcut. See my episode on Magna Carta if you want to have a great tour through that whole storyline. But the beautiful thing that they did was they created just some very simple rules that extended beautifully, as if it's pure godly truth, that protected an entire nation and made us, in terms of the bankers, the most hated nation on planet Earth. America is special. America is unbelievably hated by the bankers and loved at the same time. How does that break down? Well, we are infiltrated at this point nearly 100%. Our military-industrial complex answers to European agents. Our banking institutions are literally controlled by the Federal Reserve banking system, which dictates how we're going to run our money. Our money is created by European bankers out of thin air, and we think we can't do it ourselves. And then every politician, every corporation, every stock, every gigantic investment banking house is all controlled by them currently in 2017. Total control. So because we're controlled, the way that they love us is that we become Thor's hammer for them. The handle goes back to their hand, but the big clubby thing on the end, well, that's our military. And they understand that they can create just a little bit of propaganda, little Joseph Goebbels action, and we will go over and crush someone in the Middle East. We'll crush anyone, anywhere, as long as they can tuck the agenda inside the Bible Belt, tuck it into the normal lexicon of American kind of sovereignty concepts, always suggesting that these countries, some of them 8,000 miles away, are somehow going to show up on our doorstep. Right? What's really funny is that they have pitched us that we have to go over and get them first over there before they come over to get us over here. Right? And yet the Democratic side of our faux political system, the DNC and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, their goal was to bring in tens of millions of these folks straight into our country and automatically just bless them. You completely love us now, right? You're here because we destroyed your countries over there. We engaged in Syrian wars and blah, blah, blah. The cover story, the bullshit cover story that any of these people are from Syria. The highest estimate of people that immigrate into Europe right now from these regions is 4% are Syrian and 96% are from everywhere over there, just trying to get on the tit, right? And it's working. But what they hate the most is the idea of America, because that's all America is. It's just an idea, right? We believe in sovereignty, and we believe that is fueled by a personal free will. Now, there is something that we call the Republic, and America was founded on a republic, which is a method of law by which you agree that a human being has a set number of rights just because you're alive. And it really dovetails into the final definition, which we always call common law on this show. But you have the right to be unimpeded by another human being just by nature that you are a human being and no one else is higher than you. What's crazy about the Christian movement for me is that they preach and believe that every man is created equal. However, they don't engage in that. If there was ever going to be a Christian crusade in the world, they should just be able to make phone calls to every single church on planet Earth and say, wherever you see hierarchy, tear it down. Which means the Vatican would go really fast, right? Because the Pope is the Jesus on earth, because Michelangelo faked a painting of Jesus, or painted a painting, of Jesus giving the key to the Pope, and from that point forward, the Pope was anointed by God through a painting, through a fictional cartoon. That's where we have sort of the final moment where that took off and became bona fide. Let's talk about free will for just a few minutes here. Free will is sort of an interesting concept because it's something that a child can barely understand. If you sat down an 8-year-old and you were the most articulate person on planet Earth, it would be very tough to really get the 8-year-old, I believe, unless they're a prodigy, to understand the true nature of free will. And I think that the reason why would be the following, although it's not exclusive to this technique. Now, if a child had been grounded or what have you, maybe it's a little bit different, but I believe that we feel our free will the more that it is taken away from us. And as a child, you have more free will than you'll ever have in your entire lifetime unless you win the lottery. So as you get older and, well, let's just take a child, for instance. What do they experience? They can experience what we call in America the K through 12, kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And then if they choose to get a college degree, they're still in that system. And then they have this kind of rule system imposed on them. You got to get up in a particular point in the day, eat, get dressed, get to school, come home, do your homework, and repeat the process. In college, it's a little bit better because you get to choose when you get up in the morning and when you go to school. You can skip a class. They don't give a shit. You still have to take the final. But as a child, which would be anyone who's just been in college their whole life and never had a real job, you get outside and you're sort of thinking, well, geez, I wonder what this is going to be like. How free am I going to be? And very quickly you realize that your academic prowess dictates what kind of job you can get, at what pay you can get, and that completely and utterly determines your free will. And so then you might have a few regrets if you goofed off in school. Maybe you get smart and pull up YouTube and learn everything you didn't learn in school and give yourself a new profession. But you start to feel, I forget what the old folktale was. The one where the giant is caught by all the little people and they put all the wires and stakes in the ground to hold him down. I forgot what that story's name is. I apologize, but you know what I'm talking about. So the idea is that's sort of how life feels when you let it happen to you. When you're the pinball in the pinball machine, you have no control over the bumpers, kickers, and flippers, and it's just sort of telling you what to do constantly. Like that movie Office Space, right? In fact, the movie Office Space is a great film to really drive this home. It was made by Mike Judge, who did Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill and all those incredible cartoons. But the whole thing is that a bunch of workers hate their job at some software in a tech company, and they're just trying to find as much free will as they possibly can in between having to go to work. So when they come home, they try to enjoy it. On the weekend, they try to enjoy it, but this boss keeps coming in and telling them they got to work over the weekend, and it just gets to a point where one of the guys flips. Super funny movie. A child, when you try to, it's time to go to bed or something, even if you're just playing, when you have to grab them and move them to a new location, either to get them into bed or whatever, and then they might, jokingly or seriously kind of struggle in your arms. Well, they didn't realize they weren't free until you grabbed them, that there were going to be constraints in life, right? But the thing is that this force in man is utterly programmed inside of us. And it begs the question of, how does this happen? How are we, especially if you go with sort of the atheist view, an evolutionary view, which we're just all dust and atoms, and as soon as you're dead, you're out cold. it's an interesting thing that inanimate mass would want to get free. Now, what's interesting is you've all seen hamsters in cages, trying to scrape on the wall of the fish tank, trying to get the hell out of there. Dogs always try to climb underneath fences, over fences. Cats never have any problem because they can get out of anything. But every wild animal doesn't want to be captive. So I'm going to put together an assertion. Some of you are going to get it right away and believe it, and some of you are going to go, what? So I've been getting, in the more cerebral, spiritual side of things in recent episodes, and I think this dovetails beautifully into that realm. But let me throw this idea at you. Let's say we do have souls, and they do run around the universe in between lives. I think that, my own brain, what's interesting is when I think about being a soul, flying around the universe, having fun, being with people or other souls that I know or that are familiar with me, or meeting new folks, or whatever it is, right? Maybe God's created an infinite playground that for the most part is infinite, wonderful, and heaven. There is no negativity because he's created so many flavors of ice cream, you'll never run out. It's quite possible, right? But have you ever thought about big fish in the ocean, like whales? Fish that can really dive deep. They can't go all the way to the bottom of the ocean or anything, but man, that is an amazing oasis for them where, unlike a bird that has to flap a wing, as long as they keep oxygen inside their lung systems, which, for whales, it's different than normal fish, they are just in an infinite sea, literally, of space, of life, just as long as, some folks don't poach them. But now imagine that whale was turned into a human being and stuck on the surface. And they try to go in the water, and it's a little tougher to swim around because you're not a fish anymore. They're used to breathing oxygen, but immediately a whale would be in a human's body and go, man, this sucks. I can't just swim around and sort of fly within the medium that is the ocean. Well, what if we are souls at the core? The third eye is nothing more than a peephole into the universe. And that, chemically speaking, they can give us all kinds of metal dusts and screw up the pineal gland, and then you no longer can look to the peephole because they've kind of put dirt over the hole, right? But if we have, infinite centuries of being out there in the universe, floating around and enjoying just being wherever we want to be, being whoever we want to be, spiritually, it's just blissful and wonderful. And then we become a mortal coil for whatever reason. It could be that this is a ride in an amusement park. It could just be, have you played Earth? Oh yeah, no, I've done Mars. That was kind of boring. Now Earth's way better, man. Instead of just being a microbe, you're like these crazy, wild human beings. Really? Oh my God, tell me more, right? But you got to finish the ride once you go in. You're gonna forget this world when you go in, because otherwise it gets messy. Oh, that makes sense. All right, so boom, we're born. But because we're born usually pretty untoxified, we get toxified fairly quickly after birth, we can feel it, we can see it. And free will could be nothing more than an echo to our previous existence, the freedom that we enjoyed from a previous existence. What makes things right and wrong? Well, because the frequency of right has a feeling, and the frequency of wrong has a much different feeling. And because when we're out there as souls floating around the universe, you don't create negativity. It's not a part of that world, and so the only thing that we're doing to understand right from wrong is to basically say that there's a contrast between where we were and where we are now, where we spend most of our time in this infinitely short life, which we call humanity, right? Have you ever wondered that, well, let me put it this way. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you could convince the world of the same exact concept? Everyone could just see what can't be unseen, the love you get when you take LSD with some good people in a good location. Once you experience that, you realize, and ayahuasca might be the same way, I don't know. But you just realize that there's a bigger picture going on, a much bigger picture. It's not just a bunch of microbes on the surface of a planet. It is a huge universe of life force. And everyone normally gets along when you're not inside this mortal coil, when you're not indoctrinated and dumbed down. For those of you who have awakened, I know that you feel this virtually every day, at least several times a week, where you go out into public, you have great conversations with great people who are good people, and you realize that there's this sort of assembly line, this trough of kind of lowbrow conversations. And then you realize at the end of the conversation, even if it lasts a couple hours, nothing profound or remotely interesting was ever spoken. And you feel like the time in your life was pretty much wasted. And maybe during a 2-hour conversation, if you can last that long, you try to, offer some threads in the sweater to maybe have a more intellectual conversation, a deeper conversation, one of more enlightenment, to get to some of those fringy ideas just to see what they think about it, but they can't conceive of what you're talking about. For them, it's all official story. And they haven't heard of an alternate theory. They haven't rejected an alternate theory. They've just always lived in the official story because their family is just giddy and happy, and there's no need to question anything. And at some point, you can get sort of, disappointed, I would say, that we have these mechanisms inside our minds that limit what we can see. Most of you have talked to a person in their 60s who also has this sort of thing, and that's typically where you find them, 60 and up. You start getting into your deep baby boomer era, and you start to realize, well, of course they don't see it. They were the gullible children of the Depression age parents, and their parents gave them everything they possibly could to protect them from bad things, not realizing that the worst things that were going to happen to our nation were after the Depression. But if it isn't apparent already, or hasn't been apparent already from every episode I've made for like the last, 3 months, what I've failed to say, but I've insinuated it and talked about it in kind of little microcosms, is to say, if I say sovereignty to an average sort of Minuteman, sort of militia guy here in America, they immediately get into the mode of, all the secret societies that are against America, all the bankers that are against America, all the bought-off politicians, bought-off generals, etc., corporatism. They see sort of a very violent need to react, to protect. And they're willing to do it, and they're trained to do it. Okay. But let me give you a slightly bigger picture. I always say the word ecosystem when I talk about, what life is. And because technically speaking, when you just do some basic math on paper, if there is anything that we call a unit of energy, a quantum packet of energy, you can't get rid of it or hide it in the universe. It simply always is. Once it is made, it is. That might transform into different forms here and there. But we get into this sort of basic understanding that if you have any organized energy, right? We look at our bodies, and our bodies are organized energies, these rolling vortexes of ethereal winds that create particles, that create us. And we say, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose this body because then I'll lose my life. And that soul thing that you keep talking about, well, that's just hanging on by a dear thread. It needs the body to stay intact. And once my body dies, this soul thing just, diffuses into the universe. I cease to exist entirely. Obviously, a lot of you don't believe that. But what I want to throw into your mind is there is no difference between the cohesion and intelligence of the body and the cohesion and the intelligence of something else that we might call the soul that operates on something different than perhaps ethereal winds. Maybe, again, it inflects ethereal winds itself, or it is affected by ethereal winds. But we have this soul that goes in this perpetual loop forever and ever and ever. And the loop can go all over the place. It gets to enjoy the definition of infinity. Infinity is the utter gift to the soul because it needs it, because it won't die. So if I can get you to think about it like this, the playground we spend the most time in is not in this body. It's out there. It's out there in the universe. We get to see infinity. We get to see all knowledge. And we get to see how it is fascinating and interesting, and we get to understand why we have to forget it all so that we don't go absolutely berserk, or, just kind of get to this stalemate of nirvana, which is hell by any other name. But if we're going in this loop of being spiritual and being physical, and being spiritual and being physical, you can insert God right there in the you really get to see his face and hang out with him when you get to the spiritual side. And then when you go into your body, you know for a fact, because you have a third eye, because you have the sense of the rest of the universe, if you acknowledge it, you have this constant communication with God, because without his or her participation in your life, you would cease to exist. The program wouldn't run for you. The particles wouldn't be there for you. The sustainer is God. If you think of it in this giant loop, then I think a lot of these worries that we have about being alive and being successful and whatever changes quite a bit. My daughter and I played World of Warcraft back when she was younger for years. Used to quest together and have a blast. And so I'm a character, she's a character, and we go fight, bosses and fight whatever. And there'd be some times where she would get killed in the game. And then you turn into a ghost and you walk back to your body and you can resurrect. It's real easy. Now, as a father, seeing your kid get knocked down, and even a metaphor, is something that you get defensive about, and you'll just slaughter whoever did it, right? And sometimes I would die and she'd do the same. But here's the big difference I want to shove into your mind. I knew my kid didn't die. One, she's in the room with me, but two, she is walking back to her body. I can see it in the ghostly realm, and she resurrects. All right. Think about the difference of losing a child in a world where you know that reincarnation is a part of the game. And then think about losing a child in a world where you don't have any beliefs, maybe simply because you haven't gone the distance in thinking, or it just hasn't been explained in any way that you can kind of keep it in your mind, right? I once had a fairly selfish thought, which was, what if you get what you asked for? If you're an atheist like Kurzweil, he dies and he just disappears. However it is, his soul is reused intentionally. You basically have this gift from God that you get what you asked for. So all the atheists of the world are sort of a dying species. They'll just disappear. They'll go to nothing, and there's nothing there. Now, I don't think that's the way it works. But it's an interesting idea for those of you who believe that there's something after this world. You get the heaven that you can conceive of. Or if you say, hey, I absolutely don't know what heaven is, I can't wait to find out, then you get that reality. And God takes care of the game. God entertains after you're gone, because you've put in some serious years as a human being. The urgency for an atheist to do everything before they die would be utterly bone-crushingly intense, I would say, the more enlightened you are. The only thing you could do, being an atheist and calming down, would be to say, well, I'm going to go humdrum through this life. I won't really create that much, or maybe you already got lucky and you did, and so you feel finished. And then it's sort of like, and then you die. That's it. In your mind, there's no crescendo at the end of life. It's sort of a depressing tragedy to your story. I see the whole thing as this beautiful loop. And, I don't think that humanity is the only thing we can be alive in, right? And I don't think that being outside of a human body is somehow less than being in a human body. Some of you might knee-jerk and say, well, of course, if you're in heaven, boy, you're the ultimate version of yourself. Hey, you're actually right. How could you not be right? No limitations. I think the big question is, of whether or not we are one step from God or one step from another being. Something we don't really get into. This is sort of at the subatomic mechanics of free will, which is why I'm bringing this up. But for those who do DMT, and the folks that I've heard, I've done DMT twice through salvia, and took a small hit once and a huge hit the second time. The huge hit, boy, it put me in a world where I was floating in a room. It was about a 10 by 10 room, sort of an old, sort of Midwestern kind of room, no furniture whatsoever. It was kind of beige walls, white molding, wood floor. And I was actually sitting on my sofa right inside that house, and I had taken this huge hit on this stuff, and I was scared of it to begin with because I'd seen some horrific videos, and I had not heard of all the DMT associations. I didn't know that what I was experiencing was DMT. But I was all of a sudden sort of floating in the middle of the room, lying down with my eyes open, and there were two elliptical kind of wire meshes that were banging into each other, and I was the current that was in between them. These two things combining created me. And I just sat there, and it was clear as day. It was amazing. I have had as I mentioned in previous episodes, I've had the sleep paralysis situation where I wake up and I'm paralyzed, but I'm awake, and I have this very distinct feeling that a being is looking at me. I get the very distinct feeling it would be something I would call an alien. Nothing bad, no reptilian, slithering and drooling on me like a slee stack, but more of sort of what they would talk about, the more stoic gray type aliens, except it feels much taller than a gray, but shorter than a beige. Like a human-sized gray. And I know that sounds weird, but that's just the feeling I've had. And I've always associated it with dreaming. I will lay my head down at night, and when sometimes I'll be just drifting off, where you almost drift off, but you kind of swing back for whatever reason. And at that point, I have what looks like someone putting a pin light in my eye, like a doctor checking your dilation, right? And it's usually off to one of the sides of my eye spectrum, and I don't know if it's some sort of discharge of electricity through my visual cortex just due to sleep. But it's a really kind of warm, sunnish light. And what's very fascinating about this happened to me 2 days ago. And this light came into my left side of my peripheral vision over here. And my eyes are probably looking almost diagonally that way anyway. But I thought, did I just see this as a chemical discharge in my eye? And I'm doing so much eye research right now. It's crazy, and especially related to cones and rods and resolutions and different types of lighting. And what was interesting was this. If I were to take a flash from a camera and say, look at this, and you turn around and go pop, and it hits you with the flash, you have that burned into your eyes. At night when you see someone with their brights on, it blinds you. When they're past you, you're like, God damn it, they got their brights on, now I can't see the cars in front of me. This thing blew out my cones. I had the impression in my eye after it was over that these things were exposed to light. Now again, it could be some sort of reaction where my cones and my rods did have some form of depletion just because I laid down, maybe a little blood pressure adjustment caused this to occur. I don't have any high blood pressure. In fact, if anything, I've got low blood pressure. But digression off, what if the next layer up from our reality are aliens? What we would call aliens. Perhaps they are us, and we take this avatar, which is a human being, and whatever they are is what we become. And let's say we're in an experiment, we're inside of a game, we're inside some almost self-preservation loop ourselves within a physical body. And then when we wake up out of this, we still believe in God, but it's some other ethereal thing over what we end up being. We don't like to think about that, in my opinion. We like to think that once we're out of the mortal coil, that we're in this beautiful world. And all indications are from people who've had this after death or near-death experiences that this is what they experience. But now let's go back into the gritty grind of sovereignty versus free will and how we might live our lives on a daily basis. If you're a parent, the algorithm goes from, well, you're trying to figure out life and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but at least it's just you suffering, right? Once you have a kid, if you at least intended to have a child, or you like the fact that it happened, which is what I wish for you, you then have to protect the child. And it's like a Russian doll, right? So you have to protect them from putting their fingers in sockets, banging their head on coffee tables, all the way up to they want to walk outside and play in the grass. And you're trying to figure out, well, is your front yard a safe place? Do you even have a front yard? Do you take your kid to a park where there's a bunch of kids of all different types of, social classes, education, and then maybe one kid wants to touch your daughter in the wrong way or beat your kid up in the face because they have a problem at home getting beat up by their parents or their brothers or whatever. What they think is fun, you think is horrific, etc., etc. But then as they get older and you start watching the fact, and you get older, you start looking at the fact that the country that you live in is a constant job. It's like a good marriage. It's constant. You're always being tested one way or the other. There are super highs and maybe a couple lows here and there. Hopefully no super lows for you. At that point, you have this sort of massive epiphany of what needs to be done. And because we aren't raised in a non-empathetic, functional manner to run the world like a lot of the elites raise their children, you struggle immediately. Because you're going to have two trains of thought to try and manage sovereignty. You're going to have the preservation of free will, but then you're going to find out folks want things in their free will cabinet that is not what they are really entitled to or what society or the world can furnish them. How many people just want to live off the dole? I didn't know this, but I was just bumping through some videos the other day, and George Michael's series came up about, there's a BBC documentary called His Last Days or The Last Days or whatever. It's fairly decent. And I didn't know that, because I didn't know about this guy until he started hitting the major airwaves, right? But I guess when he was a kid, he did this rap way in the mid-'80s, and it was about the fact that in Britain, it was very easy to get on Social Security kind of welfare payment systems. Even if you had money in your house and your parents had money, you could just pop out of school and immediately live off the state. And his whole thing was his disgust with the fact that people were doing this. I think his bandmate, the brunette dude from Wham, was doing this so he could become a musician. So it worked out in the end. He generated a lot of money for the state in the end, but I'm sure he's the exception, right? But let's say you're trying to manage the situation. Sovereignty is an amazing sort of infinite responsibility, because no matter where you are in the chain of command trying to manage it for yourself or for others, there's always a higher level. Free will can very easily be indoctrinated and manipulated into entitlement. And entitlement is where someone starts to take a hell of a lot more than their fair share. And they feel righteous doing so. Super tough algorithm to manage. So, I think this conversation has immense value from the charter of this show, which is to rebuild society from the bottom up. Again, if we are privileged enough to take back this planet, we have to have had thousands of hours of conversation right on this subject matter to figure out how we're going to convince the corrupted who have lived under the previous regime to correct themselves and to believe in that correction, to go from entitlement to what they are actually entitled to, because it's tough at the top. There's this event in America right after Thanksgiving. It's called Black Friday. We usually have our Thanksgiving, I can't remember if it's a Thursday or a Wednesday, but there you have this really long week off. But you have, say, a retail place that we call Target. It's usually the epicenter of hell and damnation. But you have all these people that come to Target on a daily basis, and they're cool. They just get the cart, they walk around slowly, they find what they need, they walk in line, they're all happy. But Black Friday is a very special day where they don't have to engage any level of humanity. They get to be scumbags. They all pile in at the door because there's all these specials, and of course the The folks with the biggest financial challenges are seeing this as a unique opportunity to get things they couldn't normally afford. A $1,000 TV might be $200. And so, geez, they got to have that for their family because they're envisioning in their mind all this positivity by having this object. The doors open, and you have a stampede, a herd. Old people get trampled, young people get trampled. Even if that's avoided, once they get to the items that are stacked up, they're now literally fighting over the boxes. They get in fist fights, they say things they shouldn't say, and just like when you overtake someone on the highway and flip them off, now you're in front of them and they're behind you, which means you have the disadvantage. Good job. But that cynicism, if you're one of the people who's coming in to behave like a normal human being, and you see this sort of mob rules insanity, you lose faith in society. There was a recent video of a bunch of ghetto kids who went into a convenience store in Florida. And they rush inside this store, there's probably about 8 of them. And they pour themselves a bunch of like slushies or whatever. And then they walk to the center area of the convenience store, throw it all on the ground, and then sort of body surf on the slush. Unbelievably bizarre moment. But they did it because in a crowd, they couldn't be stopped as easily. And really the violation is they stole a few drinks and they made a mess. So they're probably not going to do any jail time, even if the cop was standing right there. Once you see that, you lose faith in society. That these kids could be manufactured by parents. And that they could go in and literally rob a store of its profit. Now, of course, when you link it back up to corporations that might own the store, you're like, F them, whatever, they deserve it. But there are people trying to earn a living in that same establishment which might lose their job by an asshole manager who goes, why didn't you stop them? When there's really no way to stop them, right? If you've ever been involved with educational systems whatsoever, you'll understand that in order to change those kids that walked in there, you can't deal with them at the point where they're being jerks. I mean, you can punish them. Maybe 1 or 2 kids actually get it and go, man, that was stupid. I was being a jerk. I just got up and got caught up in what my other 6 friends were doing, etc., etc. But the thing we have to do in this world is to educate and discuss these sort of subliminal, subtextual, subdermal subjects such that we can have, such that kids can ask the question. You can put the question in your child so they can hear it back. Now, obviously, the sad fact is that the kids sometimes are mentally incapable of understanding what you're saying because they've never been raised properly from the bottom up. You may have woke up as a parent and your kids are in their mid-teens and you're realizing, oh my God, I myself was ignorant to these things and now I have been enlightened. I want to pass this to my kids, but I'm already, the old fart they don't want to listen to. Or it's going to take 10 years for them to start listening to you. One of the most interesting facts about Americans is that if you were to go up to the average American and say, what is tyranny? They have no idea what that word means. And isn't it interesting that the word that locks down the apparatus that would enslave them is the word they don't understand exists, or they know it exists, but they don't know what it means? How fast can you indoctrinate a person when they don't know the nomenclature used to have a conversation about being enslaved? You ever been in a public place where someone speaks a language you don't understand and they're just talking loops around you to their family, to their friends? You don't know if they're saying horrible things about you or good things about you or not talking about you at all. You don't know. Well, if all the words that we use, like sovereignty and tyranny and freedom and republic and what that means, inalienable rights, if they don't know what those phrases or words mean, then they are unable to be enlightened to it. And it's super duper sad, right? All of our homework is the following. We have to somehow weave into conversation, perhaps without a giant agenda over it, these words, these concepts. Maybe in a complimentary way, You're just kind of bouncing off a conversation note. You're not going to go negative. You're just going to say, well, that's why I like the forefathers, because they really understood the oppression of tyranny. You know what tyranny is, da-da-da-da-da. And, that's why we have to maintain our sovereignty and da-da-da-da-da. It's the counterforce to tyranny. And what's interesting about it? It's all fueled by free will. Boom, 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 boom. I was thinking maybe the soul and the human body, and you start to describe the ecosystem to them, and you start to give them a picture in their brain that they can easily recall when the subject matter comes up. I think you feel me. I think we're all on the same page anyway. It's just the methodology to expose it, to educate it, to proliferate it in our society. That's what we're up against. Let's increase the conversation complexity just a little bit, and then just a little bit more, and then just a little bit more until the day we die. The thing that I will tell you that's the secret sauce to get anyone to listen to you is essentially say, do you think the world is perfect? Do you think the world is even remotely acceptable the way that it's put together today? Do you think fairness is everywhere or nowhere? All right. I have a question I always ask people that you might want to use, and you say, in your entire life, and this is better if you can ask someone over 50, in your entire lifetime, what laws have passed that benefited you? The only two I ever hear mentioned is the civil rights movement out of the 60s for America and seatbelts. That's it. You might be able to throw in minimum wage, but come on, can anyone really afford to live off minimum wage? No, not even if you make it $15 an hour. It's a joke. So when you get them to see sort of the paradoxical game that they've been sold, the illogical, again, cognitive dissonance formulas, these two concepts that are sold to be congruent with each other, which are diabolical, or diametrically opposed forces, then you've got a conversation going. Because what you've also done is taught them the formula of bullshit. And that's important. Once they can start seeing the doublespeak, then they start seeing all of the contrary formulas that is reality today, right? Anybody who wants to throw like global warming at me, aside from the science that doesn't support it, you have the two biggest polluters in the world that are absolved from any responsibility. So what the fuck is the point of lecturing me in a first world country, a place that has scrubbers on our manufacturing silos? We barely put out anything. We've got electric cars now replacing fuel cars on a daily basis. I'm going to tell you right now, in Southern California, we're at probably 15 to 20% either pure electric or pure hybrid cars. And the number's growing every single day. We will be damn near emission-free in 20 years. I think we'll be utterly emission-free in 20 years. So what's the point in panicking right now? Just let the natural cycle happen. So I think that's it. Hopefully that did it some justice. It's just, again, a lot of these episodes will go on for over an hour and some change, but in the end, I've just scratched the surface. And that's usually my opinion of about 90% of the episodes, is we just sort of got the conversation going. So hopefully you guys can take it the whole distance. In the comments, conversations with your friends, all the above. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio if you're on video. Your video choices are YouTube and vid.me. Your audio choices are iTunes, Google Play, or just go to DeepThoughtsRadio.com on your mobile device. Click the RSS feed. Make sure you have your podcast reader installed. Boom, it'll connect. You'll be good. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.